The Fighter and the Kid is one of the oldest comedy podcasts out there with nearly 900 podcast episodes and over 230 million total channel views on YouTube. And although Brendan Schaub and Calling are still in business together, there were a lot of moments in which the fans thought that the show was coming to an end. So in this video, we'll take a look at some of the most intense and awkward moments in the show's history, from the legendary fight about who had been in more street fights to most recently Rick Glassman putting on a complete clinic, a masterclass, trolling them on their own podcast. And funny enough, that episode is now sitting at nearly 200,000 views, which makes it their most successful podcast episode in the past 6 months. So with that being said, let's get started.
I actually believe if you're in a bar and a guy makes you mad enough to fight and try to really hurt him and knock him out, in a way, the times I've been in fights, I wanted to kill the guy. I wasn't just going to punch him. I had deep hatred, and in that moment, I was trying to kill him.
Can you relate to this, Jen, or am I the only normal person in the room? I'm telling you, B. I've never.
You're just a different sort. But
Joe and I have a baby together. If I came home tonight, she went, listen, I just got done in 7 dudes. There's nothing in my body that would go through my mind to kill her. That does not exist in me. Any fight I've ever been in, I've been in way more fights than you. Never once
you've also been in. What I'm saying is you've also been in.
You're talking about street fights, right?
Yeah, I'm
Brian?
talking about
street fights. I've been more street fights.
I don't think
than
you've been in more than I've been. I don't. I've been in. I've been
you
in
grew
a
up
lot.
rich. What are you talking?
Hold on. Don't tell me that, because you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
You've been more fights than me.
I've been in as many fights as you've been in.
Oh my God.
In the street, I know you, dude. You don't fight. I know you. Don't tell me that.
Oh my God.
Wait. Why? You don't know me. You don't know how I grew up. As in getting in fights in a bar. You almost saw me get in 2 fights since you've known me. What are you talking about? Don't say that. You don't have the kind of temper I do. Don't act like you've been in more fights. You're acting like, oh, I grew up rich. First of all,
now, for those who used to watch the podcast back then, it was very clear that fight was eventually going to happen. At that time, Brendan Schaub was discovering new levels of, internet fame and money that was quickly changing him and making him tough to watch. That argument happened about 5 years ago, and one could argue that is when the show officially peaked. Now, the wild thing that blows my mind is that prior to this, Brendan Schaub had already contradicted himself, by saying that he would never fight, and then having that story about him pushing a roommate through a glass door when he didn't want to fight him. And what's even more shocking is that even after that whole argument, even after him saying that he has been in more street fights than he can count, 3 years later, he changes back to the narrative that he had never ever been in a single street fight.
I promise you I've been in more fights than you, Brian.
What? How many fights you been in?
I couldn't even count.
Have you ever knocked someone out before in just a fist fight or anything
never,
like that?
Never been in a street fight, nothing.
Really? You've never been?
No.
Just your brothers messing around and
just
shit?
my older brother beat the shit out of me, but I'm like 1 in 9,000 against him. I won 1 fight when I was like 7.
So this is the first time you've ever knocked
real
a person
fight,
out.
yes.
How'd you do it? How'd you catch him?
I know you. I know a lot of people. You grew up I know your personality. You weren't street fighting all the time.
I was street fighting with my brother, the neighborhood we grew up in.
Sure, your brother.
It's the way we grew up, B.
Yeah, I fought plenty in high school and in college.
Okay, you're some badass.
I'm not.
You're some
why are
badass
you
street fighter.
Why
badass.
are you saying I'm a badass? Why are you doing that? You're being insulting.
I'm not being insulting.
Being insulting.
I just called you a badass.
No, you're not. You're being condescending. What you're saying?
How?
You're going, oh, you grew up rich and you haven't fought. Don't say that. You don't know me.
Why are you so upset?
Because I have a bad temper.
Do you see how I'm not upset? Because I know it's true.
Exactly.
Because I know it's true. I don't get defended.
So I'm making up stories about
You make
fighting?
up a lot of stories.
I make up a lot of stories? So I'm a liar.
Yeah.
I'm a liar?
Are you shitting me?
Tell me a story I've made up. A real story. First of all, be careful now how you speak.
And something I find interesting is that Brendan Schaub was an actual martial artist, was a top 10 fighter in the world, but then starts doing podcasts and stand-up comedy and just completely ditches any humility or any honesty that he ever had. I mean, Schaub still had a lot of haters while he was in the UFC, but at least he was a martial artist, if that means anything. And the thing is that the argument itself turned into a dumb argument, because Brian Callen was essentially saying that he believes people can act and do bad stuff while they are under, a stage of like rage or passion or whatever. Brandon, on the other hand, is saying like, no, if you do something, it was, you consciously thought about that and you wanted to do it. You can argue whether who's right or wrong, but what I think you should really focus on is the fact that Brendan Schaub thinks it's okay to call out Callen as a liar on the podcast while he was clearly working on his You to Be Surprised material. If Bryan Callen wanted to, he could have ended the argument by just exposing Brendan Schaub's entire You to Be Surprised act.
You're telling me you don't exaggerate stories.
I do not lie. I never lie.
You've never lied.
No, I don't lie when it comes to real stories, like saying I'm a black belt, saying that I won the nationals, all that, or saying I was a wrestler. That's lies. Have I ever done that? I have character. I don't lie.
I'm not saying you don't have character.
Yeah, no, you are.
No.
That's an attack on my
I've
character.
never said you've never had character.
Okay, but you're saying I lie. What do you mean by I lie?
You've lied before, for sure.
Give me an example.
Late to the studio all the time, missing shows. I can keep going on and on.
I never lied about that
Guys,
in my life.
we all lie.
Are you?
I've never lied about missing shows. When I miss shows, I'm working.
You've been late to the show. I go, what are you doing? You're like, you don't make it. You even told me.
We're joking around. When I go, oh, there's a break, a main break. What do I do later? I've never in my life, lied to you, a friend, like where I've made up a story and then not told you I was joking around. Ever. What are you talking about? Did I lie?
We both lied to each other.
No, but not.
You're not Saint Therese up in this.
Hold on.
Once again, now that Brendan Schaub has a reputation for not being the most honest, it's pretty poetic watching him bash Bryan Callen like that, because as we know, Callen and every other comedian obviously exaggerate and even lie about stories when telling jokes, whatever, for entertainment. That's the excuse. But when it comes to Brendan Schaub, not only does he lie when he, for profit, when he attempts to make jokes on stage or on comedy specials, but he also lies when it's convenient for him or when it'll help him look better in the situation. So again, that fight was an example of how his personality will change to back up what he is doing at the moment and make him look good, which was also kind of what happened when they put out that weird video addressing the Chris D'Elia allegations.
I think, Brendan, we have to at least talk about this. If you've been following this Twitter thing the way we have, you know what's going on with our friend Chris. And I'm not going to sit here. I'm a man, and I define myself on how I respond to these situations in real time when the pressure's really on. And I'm just at a loss. I'm at a loss, and I'm praying that what I'm hearing isn't true. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
I can't talk.
It's just, I don't know. I don't know what to think, and I don't know. And that's what's so frustrating.
I'm just sad.
Yeah.
I'm sad.
So anyway.
I'm mad, man. I'm mad at him.
Okay.
Now, them addressing the Chris D'Elia accusations on the podcast was a huge turning point for the show, not only because of what was about to happen to Bryan Callen, but mainly because of Brendan Schaub's reaction. Obviously, the accusations were very serious, and Chris D'Elia lost it all at some point. But even then, Brendan Schaub's decision to cry on air was just bizarre for most people. Once again, it was a perfect example of how Schaub's personality is always to make it about himself, even when it comes down to a close friend of him basically losing everything. I'm not saying that he shouldn't have said anything, but I think Theo Von's response was more appropriate and better thought out than Brendan's. And I hate going back to this, but it's worth pointing out how similar Brendan Schaub and Kalila are, because they both had the exact same reaction when it came down to dealing with a difficult situation. They both had a very similar reaction, which was to act vulnerable and essentially make it about themselves.
I can't talk.
Just give me a second.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
I just don't want to say it.
It's a f***up thing.
I can't talk.
This
Well,
podcast
that's
is
appropriate.
However, when the cameras are off, they're both capable of screaming at each other, fighting with each other, calling each other names, and threatening to end each other's career. It's pretty wild that both of those things can exist within the same person. Shortly after that happened, Bryan Callen was also accused and had to leave the Fighter and the Kid podcast for a little bit, which didn't help the show at all. At this point, he had already released the legendary comedy special, and the hate was barely starting to ramp up. And if you like what you're seeing so far, please make sure to hit the like button. It helps out so much to push the video to other people, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
We have that too, but
You know about this?
that's you're okay with
Bubba,
him.
that dog is not friendly. That's a dangerous dog.
Hey.
That's a dangerous
No, he's
dog.
cool, man. Be cool.
I know.
I wish my hand
Don't
on
look
that.
at the dog.
yeah, how about,
Let's end on a happy note. I have just a quick video.
No, well, yeah. Well, hey, how about,
That dog-
don't look at it. Don't look at it.
Dude, that dog is gonna bite somebody.
Don't put him in the
I'm
eyes.
telling
Don't
you.
put him in the
I've
eyes.
been around
you,
dogs
he's
a
not
long
Don't
time.
don't stare him in the eyes.
Yeah.
Meatball.
That dog is
Meatball,
going
don't look
after
at it.
people.
You're okay. All right,
He's
so
a cute dog though.
we were talking.
Now, this one here wasn't really serious, but it was more of a bonus one because it was a funny representation of what was about to happen to Shrimp. He used to work behind the cameras with Thick Boy Studios, and I think he was let go. He was fired when the whole truck walk situation happened, if I remember correctly. And before that happened, Brian Callen was visibly worried about the dog since it was a big dog. And after that happened, his mood completely changed for the rest of the podcast, and he was just staring at the dog most of the time.
You're like, sometimes you make us laugh. I think it's just like, don't be bothered by missing a lot. We could edit your shit out.
I'm not, dude.
This isn't live.
I'm not.
Honestly, dude, it's so fun to do this podcast. I watch this every week. Every time I turn on my computer,
Yeah.
I'm like, first thing I got to do,
We're in your face.
what are the fighter and the kid talking about this week?
Yes.
And I'll listen. You guys usually talk about like the best stuff, but like being here,
Yeah. It's different.
Surreal, huh?
We're a metric.
Feels like you're on like back in the day, like Johnny Carson. Am I right?
no, it doesn't feel like a high status thing. It
Oh.
But this is vintage old school shit, bro.
it just feels nice. It feels nice to play with the boys.
Yeah. Pioneers.
I think you guys are some of the people that do podcasts, and it's so nice.
That's
to
a
be
very
here.
general
I
thing.
really
to say.
do. Now there is a lot
Very
of people doing
general thing to say.
podcasts, but one of the originals, right? So you're
Well, by original, you mean like you have been doing it maybe longer than some of the other people. Not original as in like your takes are original or special.
No, I mean,
Still doing Undateable?
No, that show got canceled a long time
Okay, I
ago.
don't know. I don't follow.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm a dramatic actor now.
So we've already talked about this episode in detail because back when it happened, it was such a wild episode and there was a lot to cover. So I recommend you watch the entire episode or watch the video that I made. But essentially, the entire podcast was a mismatch, and Brendan Schaub and Callen were just trying to keep up with Rick. And what's funny is that Rick actually tried to do something similar or did something similar with the Trash Tuesday girls recently. Now, back when this happened, it was very clear to me that Rick was aware that the Fighter and the Kid podcast views were trending downward because he was hitting that angle hard. And I think it was mainly because of what he said, that back then he invited both Brendan Schaub and Callen to do his podcast, and only Brendan Schaub showed up. Brendan Schaub or Brian Callen essentially ignored him, never really did the podcast, and he confronted him on the Fighter and the Kid show. At first, I thought it was maybe a joke, but then 4 months later, now Brian Callen still hasn't been on Rick Glassman's podcast, so I think that was pretty serious.
Let's
if you don't
start
mind,
with-
are you sober, Rick?
I'm not sober, but I don't really drink. I find drinking messes with my faculties, and I shine the brightest when I allow myself to be the most true to who I am. We're going to start a stopwatch. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian. Hey, Brian.
Now, this one was one of many examples in which Rick Glassman would essentially say the truth, but pull it off as if he was joking or doing a bit. Because earlier on that podcast, Rick was joking around, telling Brian Callen that he would have him on the podcast, but he would have to work something out to where he wasn't on an episode with sponsors. Now, obviously, that's hinting towards Brian Callen's cancellation, which is wild to say to his face. And the funniest part is when Brendan asks Rick if he wants a drink and is clearly not happy with his answer. Because here's the thing, I don't believe Rick Glassman is any better than Schaub for not drinking, but the fact that he mentioned that he, took a shot at Brendan Schaub's relationship with alcohol is savage. Once again, I recommend you watch that entire podcast episode, or at least watch the video that I made about it, because although I don't believe Rick Glassman is the greatest or the best stand-up comic out there, he definitely put on a clinic and trolled them on their own podcast, made them uncomfortable. Once again, that episode is sitting at almost 200,000 views, which makes it their most successful episode in the past 6 months. And yes, I included Bert Kreischer's episode, and the only one that beats it is the one with Liver King with like 230,000 views. But the moral of the story is that they need more confrontation. They need more people to call them out on their own podcast and make it funny, which is why comedians like Chris D'Elia, Theo Vaughn, Will Sasso, and even Bobby Lee had the best appearances on the podcast because they were the only comedians that were willing to call them out and not scared of hurting their feelings. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe to support the channel. Dislike if you didn't like the video. But that is all we have for today. Have a good weekend. See ya.